You've probably heard people recite ancient texts, looking for a sense of peace.
Right.
Maybe you've even done it yourself. You light a candle, you read a passage, and you look for that quiet spiritual blessing.
Yeah, that personal comfort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if treating this specific text like a comforting spiritual blanket is actually the equivalent of using a state-of-the-art MRI machine as a paperweight?
Oh, wow. A paperweight.
Right. You're sitting there admiring how heavy and shiny it is.
Yeah.
Completely oblivious to the fact that it was designed to diagnose and cure the deepest, most systemic diseases of human society.
That's a staggering disconnect. And it perfectly captures the foundational assumption we are dissecting today.
Yeah.
Because we approach these ancient texts, particularly the Quran, with a heavily conditioned mindset.
We really do.
We assume they belong in the realm of the strictly personal, the strictly spiritual, the mystical.
Or like it's just meant for meditation.
Exactly. We assume their primary function is to help us feel better about a broken world, rather than providing the actual concrete engineering schematics to fix it.
Which is why we're here.
Yeah.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive stack of lecture notes, historical contests, and translations that explore the first 8 verses of Surah Al-Imran.
It's a dense section of the text.
It really is, but we are looking at them through a highly specific rationalist lens, the systemic analysis of a 20th century scholar named Allama G. Parwez.
Yeah.
And our core mission today, for you listening, is to completely shatter what we'll call the ritual trap.
The ritual trap. I like that because the text we are looking at aggressively, corrects this naive misconception that religion is just a set of passive dogmas.
Right.
Parwez's analysis draws an absolute unbridgeable separation between two distinct concepts. On one hand, you have mazhab.
Okay, mazhab?
Yeah. This is what we traditionally understand as a stagnant ritualistic religion. It's highly individualized, focused on, appeasing a deity through chants.
Like checking a spiritual box.
Exactly. And usually involves a populace essentially sitting around waiting for a divine savior to come down and fix their suffering.
Just waiting.
Right. But on the other hand, you have din.
And din is the MRI machine in this analogy.
Yes, exactly. Din is a dynamic, active, state-driven socio-economic system.
Wow, okay.
It is not something you merely believe in. It is something you institutionalize. It governs economics, jurisprudence, social equity, and even scientific inquiry.
So think about it like this. Imagine you are handed the architectural blueprints for a perfectly sustainable, poverty-free, completely frictionless city.
A utopia, basically.
Right. The engineering is flawless. The plumbing works. The energy grid is infinitely renewable. The zoning laws prevent any single person from hoarding resources.
Sounds pretty good.
But instead of getting some hard hats, pouring the concrete, and actually building the city, you take those blueprints, you frame them in gold, you hang them on your wall, and you just gather your community around to sing songs to the blueprints every Friday.
Yeah. And the tragedy in that scenario isn't that humanity lacks the solution to its suffering. The tragedy is that we have mistaken the operational manual for a piece of abstract art.
Man, that hits hard.
It does. Parwez's analysis argues that these first 8 verses of Surah Al-Imran demand the active physical implementation of justice. They represent a constitutional decree for a society, not a passive, dogmatic expectation of the afterlife.
So to understand how a text transforms from a book of personal blessings into a constitutional blueprint, we first have to reckon with a massive linguistic problem.
The vocabulary.
Yes, the vocabulary. We have to realize that the words we thought we understood have been fundamentally altered over centuries.
Completely stripped of their original meaning.
Right. If you're reading a manual on how to build a combustion engine, but you think the word piston means a nice thought, and the word spark plug means a quiet prayer, well,
that engine is never going to start.
Never. We need a linguistic key to decode these Arabic terms, moving them from these floaty religious definitions back to their concrete systemic realities.
And we see this corruption of language everywhere in traditional interpretations. Take a word like sabar.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows sabar.
Traditionally, it's translated as patience. If an oppressor takes your land, have sabar. Just sit quietly, endure the suffering, and God will reward you later.
Just, turn the other cheek and wait.
Right. But in a systemic state-building context, the root of sabar actually means steadfastness.
Like holding the line.
Exactly. It means holding your ground in the face of an enemy. It means the rigorous, unwavering commitment to a strategic goal without breaking formation. It is an active, militant resilience, not passive victimhood.
That is a totally different vibe. Or a word like salat, people universally translate it as the ritual prayer.
Right, the physical act of praying.
But systemically, the source notes say it originally referred to following a divine roadmap closely, the way a runner follows the exact footsteps of the runner ahead of them.
Yeah.
It was the establishment of a system that allowed individuals to follow the objective laws of the state. If we don't fix the vocabulary, we simply cannot see the system.
Which brings us directly to the opening of Surah Al-Imran. Verse 1 consists simply of letters. Alif, Lam, Mim.
Just 3 letters.
Just 3 letters. Traditionally, commentators look at these letters, throw their hands up, and declare them entirely mysterious.
Yeah, the classic, only God knows what this means, interpretation.
Unknowable riddles meant to humble the human mind.
Which, honestly, if this is supposed to be a clear manual for society, opening with an unsolvable riddle seems totally counterproductive.
It would be entirely counterproductive. But Parwez, utilizing classical Arabic lexicography, identifies these as huruf-i muqattatat.
Okay, meaning what?
These are structural abbreviations. This was a very common linguistic custom in the Arabic language of that era, not dissimilar to how we use acronyms today to condense complex authority or concepts into a few letters.
Oh, like a document stamped with US, or a letter ending with RSVP.
Exactly. They aren't mystical, they are highly functional.
So what function does Alif Lam Mim serve here?
In this systemic framework, it functions as a signature of absolute intellectual authority. It conceptually translates to Ana Allah Alam, meaning I am Allah, the all-knowing.
Oh, wow. So it's the seal at the bottom of the Supreme Court document.
Yeah.
It establishes jurisdiction before the first law is even read.
It instantly dictates that the socio-economic system that follows in the subsequent verses does not originate from human guesswork.
Right.
It doesn't come from a king's arbitrary desire or some philosopher's flawed logic. It comes from a supreme intellect. It establishes the foundational authority out of the gate, preventing any human from later claiming they've thought up these laws themselves.
Okay, so once that seal is on the document, verse 2 drops what the notes call a constitutional decree. And it revolves around a term that gets thrown around a lot, Al-Qayyum.
Yes,
Yeah.
Al-Qayyum.
If you asked a traditional theologian, they usually translate Al-Qayyum passively. They'll say it means the sustainer. It evokes an image of a cosmic force, just, keeping the lights on in the universe, a passive hum of existence.
But the lexicographical root of Al-Qayyum is far more active and structural. It designates the entity that provides the foundational, concrete laws required for the existence, stability, and progressive development of every single thing.
So it's not just sustaining in the sense of keeping things alive.
No, it is the active provision of the mechanics of existence.
Okay, think of it less like a battery keeping a flashlight on and more like the foundation and load-bearing steel skeleton of a massive skyscraper.
That's a great analogy.
The steel skeleton doesn't just passively sustain the building. It actively dictates where the floors can go, how much weight the structure can handle, and how it withstands earthquake tremors without collapsing. It provides the precise physical laws the building needs to exist safely.
And that hits the mark because it emphasizes structural integrity. Just as the physical universe operates flawlessly under physical laws, gravity, thermodynamics, human beings require a specific set of laws to successfully navigate civilized social life.
Because we bump into each other.
Exactly. When humanity elevates from isolated hunters to a complex, interconnected society, we interact constantly. And where there is interaction over resources, power, and space, there is the immediate potential for friction, exploitation, and collision.
You're talking about the transition from individuals to a functioning state.
Yes. Al-Qayyum provides the precise socio-economic laws to ensure human interactions occur without that destructive friction. In Parwez's terminology, this manifests as nizam-i-rubiyat, or the system of providence.
The system of providence.
Right. It is a socio-economic order where the central authority, the markaz, is legally obligated to ensure the nourishment, development, and security of every single citizen.
Yeah.
Al-Qayyum isn't a deity tossing breadcrumbs from the clouds. It is the ultimate lawgiver, providing the blueprint for a welfare state where no human is left vulnerable.
Which fundamentally redefines the scope of the text. I mean, if Al-Qayyum is laying down the steel skeleton for a friction-free society, then the next concepts, in verses 3 and 4, Tasdeeq and Al-Furqan, take on a totally different weight.
They really do.
Usually we hear Tasdeeq translated as a new scripture, simply confirming previous scriptures, like, yep, the Torah and the Gospel were true. Just a verbal nod of approval to the older books.
But Parwez radically redefines this because a mere verbal confirmation makes no logical sense in this context. Previous scriptures had been historically altered, mistranslated, and fragmented over centuries.
Right, they were a mess by that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For a new, flawless revelation to simply give a blanket verbal approval to historically corrupted texts would be contradictory. Instead, the root of tasdeeq means to actualize, to materialize, or to prove true in a physical, practical sense.
So it's taking the promise off the page and putting it into physical reality.
Yes. All previous texts, the original Torah, the original gospel, predicted a final, perfectly just socio-economic system. They laid out the theoretical promise of a society free from tyranny.
Okay.
The Quran, in this framework, didn't just say those predictions were nice ideas. It, along with its messenger, physically materialized that state. They built the city from the blueprints. They established the actual functioning Nizami Rubiyat in real time.
So it proved the previous books true by actually achieving what they only theorized. And it does this by acting as Al-Furqan.
Yes, Al-Furqan.
The lecture notes describe Al-Furqan as the ultimate criterion that separates truth from falsehood with absolute microscopic precision. There's a vivid image used in the source material. It's like a finely toothed comb parting hair flawlessly.
I love that image.
Right, not a single strand is out of place. It separates what is genuinely beneficial for human development from what is destructive.
And the implications of that actualization of the comb parting the hair perfectly and the city finally being built lead to one of the most profound systemic shifts in the entire philosophy.
Okay, where does it lead?
Because tasdeeq has occurred, and because the constitutional blueprint is complete and proven to work, we arrive at the concept of katnibibwa, the finality of prophethood.
I want to spend some time here because usually people think finality of prophethood is just a theological trivia fact. No more prophets, the list is closed.
Right, just a historical footnote.
But the systemic implication here is massive. It changes the entire psychology of the human race.
It represents the permanent closure of the waiting room. Traditional mazhab relies heavily on passive messianic hope. The psychological crutch that society is inherently broken, human beings are inherently flawed, and therefore our only recourse is to wait for a Messiah, a Mahdi, or a Mujadid to magically arrive from the sky and fix our corrupted economic and social systems.
Just looking up at the sky, waiting.
Exactly. And Parwez argues that this messianic stagnation completely destroys the active political vitality of a society.
I mean, if you genuinely believe a savior is coming tomorrow to clean up the mess, you aren't going to pick up a broom today. You just sit at the window and wait.
Messianic expectation breeds societal apathy. If the blueprint is final and the capacity to build the state is proven, then waiting for a savior is an act of rebellion against the system.
Wait, hold on. If the system is finalized, the blueprint is delivered, and the era of waiting for divine intervention is officially permanently over, doesn't that put 100% of the terrifying burden of fixing the world squarely on our shoulders right now?
It does.
Doesn't that mean we are entirely alone in this mess?
Not alone because we have the blueprint, but entirely responsible. And yes, it places the absolute burden of execution squarely on human shoulders. The manual is in your hands.
Wow.
The failure to achieve socioeconomic justice, the presence of extreme poverty, the reality of political tyranny, these are not happening because God is withholding a savior or testing us with suffering.
Right.
They are happening because humanity is actively refusing to enforce the laws of Al-Qayyum. The enforcement of the state is the unyielding responsibility of the community.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. No one is coming to save you. You have to build the city yourself.
Yes.
But if the burden is entirely on us, that brings us to the hardest question of all. How do we actually govern? Because historically, human beings governing other human beings hasn't just gone poorly, it has resulted in unspeakable atrocities.
Over and over again.
So if we are handed this blueprint, what is the engine that prevents the architects from becoming dictators?
The text anticipates that exact vulnerability. The foundation of this new socio-economic state, its economic engine, begins with a concept that must be fiercely protected: the absolute eradication of human sovereignty.
The eradication of human sovereignty. Let's look at the phrase, La ilaha illa huwa. There is no God but He. You hear this everywhere.
Everywhere.
It is chanted in prayers. It's written in gorgeous calligraphy on mosque walls. It's universally treated as a purely theological, spiritual mantra acknowledging monotheism.
Linguistically and systemically, Parwez views this not as a ritualistic creed to be mumbled on prayer beads, but as a firm, immovable constitutional decree.
A decree against what?
It mathematically negates the existence of any human lawgiver, any dictatorial power, or any arbitrary authority over humanity.
Okay, I have to challenge the practicality of this. Negating all human lawgivers sounds beautiful in a utopian philosophical sense, but functionally, how does a society actually operate?
Right, who builds the roads?
Exactly. How do you pave roads, collect taxes, organize a military, or run a Supreme Court without human beings making executive decisions? Doesn't eradicating human sovereignty just create an administrative vacuum that leads to anarchy?
It would lead to anarchy if there were no central authority. But the system requires the establishment of a markaz, a central coordinating body. The crucial distinction is that the humans operating the markaz do not possess sovereignty.
Okay.
They cannot invent laws based on their own desires, prejudices, or economic interests. They are strictly executives of the objective divine law.
So the president or the prime minister in this system isn't a ruler. They are an administrator of a pre-existing constitution.
Precisely. In the ultimate manifestation of this system, no person can be a subordinate to the arbitrary will or command of another human being.
Right.
The text argues that subjugating one human to another, allowing humans to assert absolute legislative authority over each other, inevitably leads to oppression. It stunts human potential, breeds resentment, and creates massive societal friction.
It always has.
True human liberation is only achieved when the rule of men is entirely replaced by the rule of objective, unchanging law.
If you're looking at this objectively, your first thought is probably, why rely on this divine law at all? We have human intellect, we have philosophy, we have democratic think tanks. Why not just use human consensus to figure out statecraft?
It's a fair question. Human intellect is an incredibly powerful tool for navigating the physical world, but when applied to constructing universal, equitable, moral, and economic laws, human intellect is fundamentally handicapped by self-interest, bias, and limited foresight.
We are selfish creatures.
Exactly. If we look at the broader historical picture, human intellect attempting to create perfect governance operates on a mechanism that is painfully slow and incredibly bloody, the mechanism of trial and error.
Trial and error on a civilizational scale.
Left entirely to its own devices to establish social authority and law, humanity has to test every theory in real time with real lives. We try feudalism, and millions suffer as serfs tied to the land.
Right.
We try absolute monarchy, and nations are bled dry for the vanity of kings. We try unfettered, laissez-faire capitalism, and we get child labor, monopolies, and staggering wealth inequality. We overcorrect and try authoritarian communism, and we get gulags, starvation, and the stripping of individual identity.
The process of figuring out what works, and more importantly, figuring out what causes catastrophic suffering, costs humanity centuries of wasted energy, endless warfare, and immense physical destruction.
Yes.
It's like a society wandering through a massive, booby-trapped maze, blindfolded. You're just bumping into walls, falling into pits, getting bruised and broken for hundreds of years, hoping you eventually stumble out the other side into a functional society.
And this is where the text introduces two vital terms in verse 8. Rahmat, meaning mercy, and Al-Wahhab, the ultimate giver. Traditionally, these are seen as emotional attributes, an emotional deity handing out spiritual blessings or forgiving sins.
Right.
But systemically, divine revelation wahi is the ultimate economic shortcut for human evolution.
An economic shortcut. It's someone flying a drone overhead, taking a high-definition picture of the entire maze, charting the safe path, and dropping a perfectly drawn map right into your blindfolded hands.
God, acting as Al-Wahhab, bestows this revelation to completely bypass that bloody evolutionary guesswork. Rahmat isn't a feeling of pity. It is the practical provision of the flawless exact coordinates for a perfect social order. It pulls humanity toward its developmental destination instantly, saving immense time, energy, and destructive friction. Societies that align their statecraft with this revelation achieve rapid advancement, completing in days what would otherwise take centuries of blind, painful wandering.
But having that map from the drone is completely useless if you're holding it upside down. Or if you read a topographic map, the same way you read a subway map, you're going to confidently walk straight off a cliff.
Exactly.
If these blueprints are as flawless as Parwez claims, How does the text protect itself from human beings just misinterpreting it, twisting the words, and causing chaos anyway?
Yeah.
Did the author build a failsafe into the language itself?
The text absolutely builds in a failsafe. In fact, verse 7 of Surah Al-Imran is perhaps the most crucial methodological verse in the entire Quran. It is the instruction manual for how to read the instruction manual.
I love that.
It explicitly divides its own contents into two distinct categories, Muhkamat and Mutashabihat. And the traditional misinterpretation of these two categories has, according to Parwez, caused profound intellectual stagnation in the Muslim world.
Let's break them down carefully, because this is where the system gets brilliant. First, the Muhkamat. The source material calls these the Kitab, which translates to the mother or the foundation of the book.
Traditional commentators often dilute this by saying these are simply verses that are clear or easy to understand. But rationally, Muhkamat are the concrete, literal laws, commands, and socio-economic rules upon which the state must be built.
Okay.
They are the objective foundation of the Nizami Rububiyat.
So we're talking about things like marital laws, inheritance distribution, the prohibition of usury, penal codes, things that require immediate literal enforcement in society.
Exactly.
You don't read a law dictating how wealth must circulate and say, what beautiful poetry about the spiritual flow of energy. No, it's a legal directive for the central bank. You enforce it literally.
But then we have the second category, the Mutashabihat. Historically, classical commentators struggled immensely with these. Some dismissed them as ambiguous mysteries known only to God. Others, far more dangerously, twisted them into literal, physical realities.
This is where translation fundamentally alters reality. Traditionalists argue these verses contain an element of doubt or ambiguity. But Parwez makes a compelling logical argument here. Attributing doubt to a book that explicitly claims in its opening pages to be a book free of doubt is a massive contradiction.
Right, it makes no sense.
So if they aren't ambiguous mysteries, what are the Mutashabihat?
They are metaphors. They address what we can call abstract truths, imperceptible realities that were beyond the immediate observation of the people at the time.
Like what?
This includes cosmic origins, astrophysics, the intricate mechanics of human psychology, the biological evolution of life, or the nature of existence after death.
And the reason they must be presented as metaphors is a fascinating limitation of hardware. Human language in 7th century Arabia was primarily designed to describe concrete physical objects in their immediate environment.
Yes.
You had 50 words for a camel, words for sand, swords, water, dates. You didn't have the vocabulary for quantum mechanics, cellular biology, or the subconscious mind.
No, they absolutely didn't.
So the supreme intellect behind the text had to use metaphors, similes, and familiar symbols to explain these highly abstract realities to an audience that simply didn't have the scientific vocabulary yet.
It is a pedagogical necessity. If you want to explain the concept of a centralized gravitational force maintaining the orbits of planets to a 7th century nomad, you cannot use the math of general relativity.
Obviously not.
You use the metaphor of an ultimate sovereign sitting on a central throne, managing the affairs of the kingdom.
But the danger of literalism rears its head immediately. Verse 7 specifically warns about those with a disease in their hearts who attempt to take these metaphors literally.
The disease is the desire to create fitna, which means chaos, religious division, and sectarian strife. When you take a metaphor meant to describe a universal abstract truth and try to nail it down as a literal physical fact, you destroy the intellect.
The lecture notes provide a wonderful historical example of this. The Quran uses the metaphor of God sitting on a throne, or his throne resting on water.
Oh, this is a perfect example.
Right. Instead of seeing this as a beautiful metaphor for central control over universal laws, or hinting at the biological origins of life and water, literalist theologians historically spent years violently arguing about the physical dimensions of the throne.
It's unbelievable.
Was it made of literal wood? Was it a peacock throne? Does God have physical hands that touch it? How big are the hands?
Which is intellectually absurd, and it leads directly to sectarian division. People start excommunicating each other or even killing each other over the physical dimensions of a metaphorical piece of furniture.
Just completely missing the point.
It halts intellectual progress entirely. The society becomes obsessed with theological fantasy rather than state-building and scientific inquiry.
Think about that for a second. Think about how many scientific realities, how many medical breakthroughs humanity might have missed out on because people were arguing about the size of a metaphorical chair instead of looking through a telescope or putting a cell under a microscope. It is a civilizational tragedy.
It is a tragedy, but the text provides the exact antidote to this literalism. It introduces the concept of ta'wil and the crucial role of a specific group of people called the rasikun fil ilm.
Let's define ta'wil. Usually if you hear someone say they were doing ta'wil of a verse, it implies they are giving it a whimsical personal interpretation, twisting the words to mean whatever they want.
That is the corrupted definition. Derived from its root, ta'wil means the ultimate consequence, the final destination, or the empirical realization of a truth over time. It is not guessing. It is uncovering the physical reality behind the metaphor. And who is tasked with discovering this ta'wil? The rasikun fil ilm, those who are firmly grounded in knowledge.
So we aren't talking about theologians sitting in a dark room meditating until they have a vision. We were talking about intellectuals, researchers, scientists.
Yes. The text demands that these intellectuals continuously engage in rigorous empirical research. They are commanded to study the physical universe, what the text refers to as afak, and the inner workings of human psychology and biology, anfas.
Afak and anfas.
And as human scientific knowledge evolves over centuries, the metaphorical veils of the Mutashabihat are gradually lifted by hard science.
I want to give these examples massive breathing room because when you read the source material on this, it genuinely blows your mind. The Quran makes the declaration that life originated from water.
Right.
1,400 years ago. To a person living in the desert, that was an abstract metaphor. They couldn't put a single-celled organism under a microscope to verify it. They just accepted it as a divine mystery.
But look at the ta'wil of that verse today. That mutashabihat has transformed into a concrete muhkamat. It is established, universally accepted biology.
Yeah.
To the point where modern astrobiologists, when searching for any trace of extraterrestrial life in the universe, literally just look for moisture. They look for ice on Mars or water vapor on the moons of Jupiter because the science has proven the metaphor. Life requires water.
Or take the verse describing celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the planets, as swimming in their orbits.
Yeah.
For centuries, classical commentators didn't know what to do with that word. Swimming? Did they mean there was literal water in the sky? Was the sun doing the backstroke?
They lacked the scientific hardware to understand the metaphor, but modern astrophysics has proven that orbital mechanics operate exactly like fluid dynamics.
Wow.
Celestial bodies literally swim along the curvature of space-time. The gravitational waves act like currents in an ocean. The metaphor was perfectly scientifically accurate. Humanity just needed 1,400 years to develop the math to understand it.
So the metaphor evolves into concrete science as our tools catch up to the text. This turns the entire book into an engine for continuous scientific discovery.
Yes.
The system requires you to fund astrophysics, evolutionary biology, and psychology just to understand the book you're claiming to follow. You cannot be a stagnant society and fully comprehend this text.
This mechanism ensures the perpetual intellectual and societal supremacy of the Ummah, the community. By anchoring the society's behavior in the concrete, unchangeable laws of the Muhkamat, you ensure social stability and economic justice.
Right.
But by continuously researching and decoding the Mutashabihat through science, the society remains entirely dynamic, cutting-edge, and future-proof. You have a stable foundation with infinite vertical growth.
Okay, so we have the literal laws for a frictionless society. We have the markaz ensuring no human dominates another. We have the mandate for endless scientific discovery. It's a perfect blueprint.
It is.
But what happens if a society says, no thanks, we're going to do it our way? We like hoarding wealth. We like dictatorial power. What happens when a society actively rebels against this blueprint? This brings us to a profound paradigm shift in how we view morality, crime, and consequence. The concept of social physics.
Social physics. We have to completely reframe our understanding of divine punishment. We have to strip away centuries of mythological thinking.
Let's start with the word kufr. Usually if you say someone committed kufr, it just means they don't believe in the theology. It's verbal disbelief. An atheist commits kufr by saying, I don't believe in God.
In the systemic context of Parwez's analysis, kufr is not merely verbal denial. It is a practical, physical rebellion against the life-sustaining, objective laws of the universe and society.
Okay, so it's an action.
Yes. You can claim to believe in God all day long, but if you construct an economic system based on exploitation, you are committing kufr against the Nizami Rububiyat.
And the result of that rebellion is azab. Now, azab is the heavy hitter. The traditional, deeply ingrained view is that azab is the wrath of an emotional God.
Right.
You break a rule, God gets personally offended, he gets angry, and he strikes you down with a plague or lightning or arbitrary torture in the afterlife. It evokes the image of a cosmic police officer beating a suspect in a holding cell out of sheer anger.
Parwez forcefully rejects that entirely. The Quranic God is not an emotional being who suffers from anger, ego, or the desire for revenge. Azab strictly denotes the destructive, inherently painful, natural consequences of violating the laws of nature or society.
It's the law of causality. Makafat iyamo. If you put your hand in a blazing fire and your hand gets third-degree burns, the burn is not the fire punishing you out of anger.
Right.
The fire doesn't hate you. The fire doesn't hold a grudge. The burn is simply the natural, unavoidable consequence of violating the physical law of thermodynamics. It is pure causality.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Parwez's brilliance is showing that this law of causality applies to socio-economic laws just as rigorously, just as scientifically, as it applies to physical laws like thermodynamics or gravity.
How so?
If a society rejects the objective laws of economic equity, if it embraces usury, allows a few individuals to hoard the nation's wealth, and leaves the masses in poverty, it doesn't need lightning bolts from heaven to punish it. The rejection of those equitable laws naturally plunges that society into chaos.
The extreme wealth inequality breeds resentment. The resentment breeds crime. The crime destabilizes the market. The destabilized market leads to violent revolution and the collapse of the state. That entire predictable chain reaction of collapse is the azab.
The corruption is the mechanism of its own eventual destruction. It is social physics. It is entirely rational and mathematically certain.
The lecture notes take this even further into the realm of biology, which I found fascinating. Verse 6 notes that God shapes humanity in the wombs strictly according to foundational laws, which the text terms mashiat.
Mashiach is often mistranslated as God's arbitrary will, as if God just randomly decides how a baby will form. But Mashiach actually refers to the unchangeable universal laws of nature, the biological laws of embryonic development.
And the notes explicitly connect this biological development to the socio-economic system. How does a society's economic policy physically alter the biology of a fetus in the womb?
Because biology does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in an environment. Societies that follow the equitable laws of nature, providing proper nutrition to all citizens, maintaining safe living environments, reducing toxic stress through economic security, produce healthy mothers.
Right.
Healthy mothers operating under optimal biological conditions produce healthy offspring.
But if a society commits kufr against the economic system,
Then you have poverty. You have mothers working 80 hours a week in toxic, polluted environments just to survive. The maternal stress hormones skyrocket. The malnutrition affects cellular development. The pollution alters DNA expression.
that is terrifying.
The society suffers the biological consequences in their coming generations. The birth defects, the generational trauma, the compromised immune systems of the poor, that is the azab. It is the physical, biological consequence of violating the socioeconomic blueprint.
That forces us to stop blaming some unseen spiritual warfare or bad luck for our societal suffering and start looking directly at our actual socioeconomic policies.
Exactly.
The suffering is engineered by our own defiance of the blueprint. But if the consequences of azab are this severe, where is the course correction? Does the system just let humanity burn itself to the ground? That brings us to a beautiful and totally misunderstood concept in verse 4, the shepherd mechanism.
The shepherd mechanism. The verse describes God as Aziz and Zuntakam. Now, Aziz means possessing the supreme, unchallengeable power to actually enforce these universal laws, ensuring they aren't just empty suggestions. But Zuntakam is a truly fascinating word here.
Because traditionally, if you look up Zundikam in a standard translation, it says vengeful or vindictive. God is the Lord of vengeance, which frankly sounds terrifying and contradicts everything we just said about God not being an angry police officer.
It contradicts it entirely. But if we dig into the classical Arabic root, Zudikam has nothing whatsoever to do with emotional vengeance or vindictiveness. It describes the specific mechanism of a shepherd.
A shepherd.
Yes. Picture a shepherd guiding a flock of sheep along a safe, narrow path through dangerous terrain. If a sheep wanders off to the side, heading toward a steep cliff or a waiting wolf, the shepherd reaches out with his crook and forces it back to the center of the path.
Right.
That action, the yank of the crook, might feel forceful or even slightly painful to the sheep in the moment, but the action is entirely protective. Zuntikam is the divine law's built-in capacity to course-correct a deviating society, bringing it back to the constructive, safe route before it destroys itself completely.
So when a society's economy crashes because of extreme, unregulated greed, the intense pain of that crash, the azab acts as the zintikam.
Yes.
It's the shepherd's crook. yanking society by the neck, forcing it to realize, hey, this unfettered greed thing isn't working. It's literally killing us. We need to return to equitable distribution. It's a built-in societal immune response.
That is exactly what it is. The pain of the consequence forces the realization of the error. It turns morality into an objective science of cause and effect, rather than a system based on the superstitious fear of arbitrary punishment.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. Let's synthesize the permanent value of what we've unpacked from Allama Parwez's notes on these first 8 verses of Surah Al-Imran. We started with a mission to shatter the ritual trap,
Right.
to realize that treating this text simply as a book to be recited in the dark for personal blessings is missing the entire point.
The ultimate takeaway is the absolute separation of that stagnant ritualistic waiting from the dynamic required enforcement of a socio-economic state.
Yeah.
The Ummah, the community, must abolish human dictatorship and arbitrary sovereignty. They must establish the markaz to enforce objective law. They must institutionalize continuous scientific discovery to decode the metaphors of the physical universe. And they must replace the fear of divine wrath with a rational understanding of cause and effect.
If you take nothing else away from this, remember this. You can no longer look at these verses simply as ancient poetry. They are the coordinates designed to bypass centuries of human suffering. They are the structural blueprints for a frictionless city.
And the waiting room for a savior is permanently closed.
The waiting room is closed. The responsibility to build it is entirely on human action.
But acknowledging that responsibility leads to a massive, inevitable collision with reality.
And that collision is what I want you to mull over until our next deep dive. If this text, these Muhkamat, mandate the absolute eradication of human subjugation, and if they demand the immediate establishment of economic justice and the redistribution of hoarded wealth, how does this system instruct us to handle the deeply entrenched wealth and power structures that already exist in the world today?
That is the ultimate question. What happens when the divine blueprint demands equality, but collides head-on with established human greed and institutionalized power?
Does this blueprint demand a slow, diplomatic, polite reform, asking billionaires and dictators nicely to step down and share? Or does it demand a total, uncompromising, ground-up dismantling of the global economic status quo?
That exact friction, how the Muhkamat disrupt and challenge established human power structures, is what we must unpack next time as we move further into the text.
Keep questioning your assumptions, keep looking past the literal metaphors, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.